What if the woman you chased with everything you had was never meant to be yours? And the one who was meant for you was hiding in the last place you would ever think to look. This is the story of a man who had the world at his feet, but could not capture the one heart he wanted most, until fate twisted his path toward a love he never saw coming. A love that would cost him everything and give him back even more. Daniel Ashford stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 62nd floor of the Ashford Tower in downtown Manhattan. Below him the city pulsed and breathed like a living creature. Taxis crawled through narrow streets. Steam rose from grates in the sidewalk. Thousands of people moved in every direction, each one carrying their own burdens, their own dreams. But from up here they all looked small. And Daniel had grown used to that view. He had grown used to looking down. At 53 years old, Daniel Ashford was not just wealthy. He was a force. His name carried weight in boardrooms from New York to London to Tokyo. Ashford Industries had started as a modest real estate firm built by his father, a quiet man with calloused hands and a firm handshake. But Daniel had taken that modest foundation and turned it into something extraordinary. He had expanded into commercial development, then luxury hospitality, then technology infrastructure. Every move he made was calculated. Every risk he took was measured, and almost every bet he placed paid off handsomely. Forbes had him listed at $4.7 billion. The number meant less to him now than it once had. There was a time when seeing his name on that list made his chest swell with pride. Now it was just a number. A very large number that could not fill the silence of his penthouse apartment at night. His office smelled of dark roasted coffee and old leather. The bookshelves behind his mahogany desk were lined not with decorative volumes, but with worn copies of biographies and histories he had actually read. There was a framed photograph on his desk, turned slightly toward his chair so only he could see it. It showed a younger Daniel standing beside his father at a construction site. Both of them wore hard hats. Both of them were smiling. His father had been gone 11 years now, and Daniel still reached for the phone sometimes to call him before remembering. His assistant Margaret had been with him for 19 years. She knew his coffee order, his moods, his schedule down to the minute. She also knew that behind the tailored suits and the commanding voice there was a man who ate dinner alone most nights. A man who had been married once, briefly, in his early 30s. It had ended not with shouting, but with a quiet confession from his wife that she felt invisible beside him, that she had married a man but lived with a corporation. He never blamed her for leaving. He blamed himself for not noticing she was unhappy until she was already gone. Daniel ran his hand along the edge of the window glass. It was cool beneath his fingertips. The October sky was a pale gray, threatening rain. He had a meeting in 12 minutes with his legal team about an acquisition in Chicago, and after that a conference call with investors in Singapore. His days were stacked like bricks, one on top of another, each one solid and purposeful and utterly predictable. People respected Daniel Ashford. Some feared him. In negotiations he was known for his patience, which unnerved opponents more than aggression ever could. He would sit quietly, listening, his dark eyes steady, and then he would speak, and when he spoke, the room shifted. He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. Power, real power, did not need volume. He had a reputation for fairness, which was unusual in his circles. He paid his employees well. He remembered the names of the security guards in his buildings. He sent handwritten notes to retiring staff members. These were small things, and he did not do them for show. He did them because his father had taught him that a man's character is measured not by how he treats those above him, but by how he treats those who can do nothing for him. Yet for all his character, for all his accomplishments, for all the zeros in his bank account, Daniel carried a hollow space inside his chest that no deal could fill. He was not a man who felt sorry for himself. He was too practical for that. But he was honest enough to admit, at least in the quiet hours before dawn when sleep would not come, that something essential was missing. He had dated over the years. Carefully, selectively. Women were drawn to him not just for his wealth but for his presence. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through dark hair that he kept neatly trimmed. His face had the kind of lines that spoke of experience rather than age. But the relationships never lasted. He would sense the moment a woman began seeing his portfolio instead of his face, and something inside him would close like a door. He wanted something genuine. Something that smelled like morning coffee shared in a warm kitchen, not champagne at a gala. He wanted someone who would argue with him about what movie to watch on a rainy Sunday. Someone who would see the man behind the name. He was beginning to wonder if that someone existed at all. That particular October morning Daniel left his office early, which startled Margaret enough that she looked up from her computer with wide eyes. He told her he needed air. The truth was simpler and harder to explain. He was restless. Something in his bones felt unsettled, like the way animals pace before a storm. He walked 3 blocks to a small bookshop he had discovered years ago. Tucked between a bakery and a tailor on a side street that most people walked past without noticing. The shop was called Thornton & Sons. Though there had been no sons for a long time, it was run by an elderly man named Arthur who wore the same brown cardigan every day and who treated his books like old friends he was reluctant to let go. Daniel liked it here. The air smelled of paper and dust and something faintly sweet, like vanilla. The shelves were crowded and imperfect. Nothing was alphabetized in any system he could discern. Finding a book here felt like a small adventure, and Daniel Ashford, a man whose life was organized down to the quarter hour, found that deeply refreshing. He was standing in the narrow history aisle, turning the pages of a book about the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, when he heard her voice. It came from the front of the shop, near the register, and it stopped him the way unexpected music stops you on the street. She was laughing. Not the polished, measured laugh he heard at charity events. This was a real laugh, warm and unguarded, the kind that came from the belly and reached all the way to the eyes. He closed his book and moved quietly toward the sound. She stood at the counter talking with Arthur. She was perhaps 45, with auburn hair pulled loosely back, a few strands falling free around her face. She wore a simple green coat and no jewelry except for a thin silver bracelet. Her hands moved when she talked, animated and expressive, and her eyes, when Daniel finally saw them, were the color of dark honey in afternoon light. She was holding a stack of 3 books and telling Arthur about a passage she had read that morning that had made her cry on the subway. She described it with such tenderness that Arthur leaned forward on his elbows to listen, completely captivated. Daniel understood why. There was something magnetic about her sincerity. She was not performing. She was simply being, and it was beautiful. Daniel felt something shift in his chest. Not dramatically, not like the movies would have you believe. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling of a door opening in a room you had forgotten existed. He stood there for a long moment, the Brooklyn Bridge book still in his hand, watching her the way you watch a sunset when you have nowhere to be. When she turned to leave, she noticed him. Their eyes met for perhaps 3 seconds. She gave him a small, polite smile, the kind strangers exchange in tight spaces, and then she walked past him toward the door. The scent of her trailed behind. Something soft, like jasmine and clean cotton. He did not follow her. Instead, he walked to the counter and set down his book. Arthur rang it up with his usual careful movements. Daniel tried to sound casual. "Who was that?" he asked. Arthur looked at him over the rims of his reading glasses. "That is Alina Vargas," he said. "She comes in every Tuesday and Friday, has for about 2 years now. Lovely woman, a schoolteacher. Reads more than anyone I know." Daniel nodded slowly. Elena. The name settled into his mind like a stone dropping into still water, sending ripples in every direction. He came back on Friday. He told himself it was for another book. He almost believed it. But when he walked through the door and smelled that familiar vanilla-scented air, his eyes went straight to the history aisle where he had stood before, and then to the counter, and then to the small reading nook by the window where a cracked leather armchair sat beneath a lamp. She was there, in the armchair, a book open in her lap, her green coat draped over the arm of the chair. She wore a cream-colored sweater and reading glasses that she kept pushing up her nose. She was so absorbed in her reading that she did not notice him come in. Daniel browsed the shelves nearby, stealing glances. He pulled a book at random, opened it, and stared at words he did not read. His heart was doing something it had not done in years. It was beating with anticipation rather than purpose. He was not closing a deal. He was not managing a crisis. He was simply standing near a woman who did not know his name and feeling more alive than he had felt in a decade. After 20 minutes he gathered his courage. He walked to the armchair and cleared his throat gently. "Excuse me," he said. "I could not help noticing your book. Is that the new collection by Whitmore?" She looked up. Those dark honey eyes found his face, and for a moment she studied him the way a person studies a painting they are not sure they like yet. Then she glanced down at her book and back at him. "It is," she said. "Have you read it?" "Not yet. I have been meaning to. Is it worth the time?" She closed the book slowly, keeping her finger between the pages to hold her place. "Every page," she said. "Every single page." They talked for 15 minutes. Standing there in that cramped bookshop with the autumn rain beginning to tap against the windows, Daniel felt something he could only describe as belonging. She was sharp and funny and direct. She asked him what he did for a living, and he hesitated for just a moment before saying he worked in business. She nodded without pressing further, which both relieved and surprised him. When the conversation reached a natural pause, Daniel took a breath. He could feel the moment arriving, that delicate instant when you either step forward or step back and spend the rest of your life wondering. "I would love to continue this conversation," he said, "perhaps over coffee sometime. There is a wonderful place 2 blocks from here." She tilted her head slightly. Her expression shifted. The warmth did not disappear exactly, but something guarded moved into her eyes like a cloud passing over the sun. She looked at his shoes, his watch, his coat, and Daniel knew she was reading the details the way she read books, with attention and understanding. "That is very kind of you," she said. "But I am not interested." The words were gentle but firm. There was no cruelty in them, no drama. Just a clear, quiet boundary drawn in the air between them. Daniel blinked. He was not accustomed to rejection. Not because he was arrogant, but because he so rarely put himself in a position to be rejected. He had controlled his world so carefully that vulnerability had become a foreign language. "Of course," he said. "I understand. I hope you enjoy the rest of the book." She gave him that same small, polite smile from the first day. Then she opened her book again, and just like that, he was dismissed. He walked out into the rain without an umbrella. The cold water soaked through his coat and flattened his hair against his forehead. He did not care. He walked 6 blocks, before he even realized he was going the wrong direction. His mind was full of her voice, her eyes, the quiet steel in her refusal. Most men in Daniel's position would have moved on. He had resources, connections, options. But Elena's rejection did something unexpected. It did not wound his ego so much as it awakened his curiosity. Who was this woman who looked at a $4 billion man and said no thank you as calmly as if she were declining a second helping of dessert? He returned to the bookshop the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. Each time he chose his moment carefully. He did not crowd her. He did not overwhelm her. He simply existed in the same space, browsed the same shelves, and occasionally exchanged a few words about whatever she was reading. On his 3rd visit, he brought her a first edition of a book she had mentioned admiring. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. He had found it through a rare book dealer in London. It had cost him $11,000. He set it on the small table beside the armchair without ceremony. "I came across this and thought of you," he said simply. Elena looked at the package. Then she looked at him. She did not open it. She picked it up and held it out to him. "I cannot accept this," she said. "It is just a book," he said. "No," she said, and her voice was kind but immovable. "It is not just a book. A book from the shop costs $15. This is something else entirely. And whatever it is, I do not want it." He took the package back. His fingers brushed hers for just a moment. The touch was brief and electric and entirely one-sided, as far as he could tell. She stood and gathered her things. At the door she paused and looked back at him. "You seem like a decent man," she said. "But I have learned to be careful with decent men who have expensive watches. Decency and generosity are not the same thing, and generosity from a wealthy man sometimes comes with strings, so thin you do not feel them until they have already wrapped around you." Then she left. The bell above the door chimed softly behind her. Daniel stood in the empty bookshop, holding an $11,000 first edition, and feeling like a man who had just been handed a profound truth he was not yet ready to understand. He tried twice more over the following weeks. Once he sent flowers to the school where she taught. Peonies, because Arthur had mentioned she loved them. The flowers were returned to his office the same afternoon with a handwritten note on lined paper, the kind teachers keep in their desk drawers. The note read simply, "Please stop. I have said no. I mean no." The second time he arranged through a mutual acquaintance to be seated near her at a community fundraiser for the local library. He wore a simple blazer instead of his usual tailored suit. He tried to be casual, approachable, ordinary. But Alina spotted him within minutes. She walked directly to his table with her shoulders straight and her jaw set. "Mr. Ashford," she said, and the use of his surname told him she had looked him up and now knew exactly who he was. "I have told you no. I have told you politely. I have told you clearly. I am telling you now for the last time. I am not interested in you, your money, your flowers, or your rare books. I am not a deal to be closed. I am not a property to be acquired. If you respect me even a fraction as much as you seem to admire me, you will hear what I am saying and you will stop." Every person at the surrounding tables heard her. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Daniel had ever experienced. He felt heat rise to his face. Not anger, shame, because she was right. He had been treating her like a negotiation. He had been applying the same persistence that won him buildings and contracts, and believing that if he just kept showing up with enough charm and enough gifts, the outcome would eventually tip in his favor. He stood slowly. He looked at her, and for the first time, he truly saw her. Not as an object of desire, not as a challenge, but as a woman who had drawn a boundary and had every right to that boundary. A woman whose strength was not a wall to be scaled, but a truth to be honored. "You are right," he said quietly. "I am sorry. Truly sorry. You will not hear from me again." He left the fundraiser without finishing his dinner. He drove home in silence. He sat in his dark penthouse apartment and stared at the city lights and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt small, not in the way the city made people look small from his office window. Small in the way that matters. Small in his own understanding of himself. For weeks afterward, Daniel carried Elena's words with him like stones in his pockets. He replayed her voice in his mind. "I am not a deal to be closed." The sentence haunted him because it exposed something he had never examined. Somewhere along the way, in the decades of building his empire, he had begun to see everything through the lens of acquisition. Properties, companies, market share, and now, without realizing it, people. He had approached Elena the same way he approached a resistant seller, with patience and persistence and escalating offers, never once stopping to ask whether the thing he was pursuing wanted to be caught. It was a painful realization. The kind that sits in your stomach like a cold stone and will not dissolve no matter how many times you turn it over. Daniel did not share this revelation with anyone. He sat with it alone, the way he sat with most of his deeper truths. He stopped going to the bookshop. He stopped sending gifts. He threw himself back into work with a ferocity that alarmed even Margaret, who gently suggested he take a weekend off. He did not take a weekend off. Instead, he flew to Chicago to oversee the acquisition he had been negotiating for months, a mixed-use development project on the lakefront that would be the crown jewel of his portfolio. But the Chicago deal brought its own complications, and those complications had a name. Victor Kessler. Victor Kessler was 61 years old, silver-haired, and possessed of a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He ran Kessler Capital, a private equity firm that had its fingers in real estate, media, and energy. On paper, Victor and Daniel were peers. In practice, they were something closer to enemies, though the word was never spoken aloud in polite company. Their rivalry stretched back 15 years to a land deal in Boston, where Daniel had outbid Victor at the last moment, costing Kessler Capital an estimated $200 million in projected returns. Victor had smiled at the closing. He had shaken Daniel's hand. And then he had spent the next 15 years looking for ways to return the favor. It was never overt. Victor was too sophisticated for that. But every few years their paths would cross on a deal, and Victor would find a way to complicate things. A whispered word to a regulator. A strategic leak to the press. Small cuts designed not to kill but to bleed. Daniel respected his intelligence but did not trust him. Nobody who knew Victor Kessler truly trusted him. Now Victor wanted the same Chicago property, and he was willing to fight for it. Daniel was in the middle of this battle, consumed by contracts and counteroffers and late-night strategy calls, when fate intervened in the most ordinary and extraordinary way imaginable. It happened at a hospital charity gala in New York. Daniel had not wanted to attend. He was tired and distracted, and still carrying the weight of Elena's rejection, like a bruise that would not heal. But the hospital was one he had supported for years, and the children's oncology wing bore his mother's name, so he put on his tuxedo and went. The ballroom was golden and glittering. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across the ceiling. Women in gowns moved like flowers in a garden. Men in black tie clustered near the bar exchanging pleasantries that meant nothing. Daniel moved through the room with practiced ease, shaking hands, exchanging brief conversations, performing the version of himself that these events required. He was standing near the terrace doors, considering an early escape, when someone stepped backward into him and spilled a full glass of red wine down the front of his white shirt. "Oh my God, I am so sorry." He looked down at his ruined shirt and then at the woman who had ruined it. She was young, perhaps 30, with dark curly hair and wide startled eyes that were almost violet in the chandelier light. She was holding the now empty wine glass and looking at him with an expression of genuine horror. "It is fine," he said automatically. "It is not fine," she said. "That is clearly a very expensive shirt, and I have just turned it into a crime scene. Please let me pay for the dry cleaning. Or the replacement. Or your therapy after this." He almost laughed. Almost. The corner of his mouth twitched. She grabbed a napkin from a passing waiter and began dabbing at his chest with determined energy. He stood there, slightly stunned, while this small whirlwind of a woman attacked his shirt with a cocktail napkin. "I think you are making it worse," he said gently. She stopped. She looked at the napkin, which was now stained deep crimson. She looked at his shirt, which was beyond saving. Then she looked at his face. "You are probably right," she said. "I am very good at making things worse. It is practically a talent." This time he did laugh. A real laugh, surprised out of him like a bird flushed from a hedge. She extended her hand. "Sophia Kessler," she said. The name hit him like cold water. Kessler. He kept his expression neutral, a skill perfected over decades of high-stakes negotiation. "Daniel Ashford," he said, taking her hand. Her grip was firm and warm. If she recognized his name, she did not show it. Or perhaps she simply did not care. They talked for an hour. Not about business, not about money, about the hospital, about the children on the oncology ward. Sophia, it turned out, volunteered there 3 days a week. She read stories to the kids. She painted with them. She sat with the ones who were scared and held their hands and told them they were brave. She spoke about these children with such tenderness that Daniel felt something crack open inside his chest. Not the desperate longing he had felt for Elena. Something different. Something quieter and more dangerous. Recognition. He recognized in Sophia a kindness that was not performed but lived. A goodness that existed not despite the world but within it, stubbornly and beautifully. She told him her father was in finance, waving her hand vaguely as if the details bored her. She told him she had studied art history in college and had wanted to be a curator, but had ended up working for a nonprofit that provided art supplies to underfunded schools. She told him she lived in a small apartment in Brooklyn with a cat named Picasso who had one eye and terrible manners. Daniel listened, truly listened. Not with the strategic patience he used in boardrooms, but with the open attention of a man who has forgotten what it feels like to be genuinely interested in another person. When the gala ended, they stood outside on the sidewalk while the October wind pulled at her hair. She wrapped her coat tighter and smiled at him. "Thank you for not being angry about the shirt," she said. "Thank you for ruining it," he said. "It was the best thing that happened to me tonight." She laughed. That same unguarded, genuine laugh he remembered hearing from Elena in the bookshop, though Sophia's was different, lighter, more surprised, as if she was not used to people making her laugh. They exchanged numbers. She texted him the next morning, a photograph of Picasso, the one-eyed cat, sitting on a windowsill, with the caption, "He wanted you to know he is also sorry about the shirt." Daniel smiled at his phone like a teenager. Margaret noticed and said nothing, but she smiled too. Over the following weeks, Daniel and Sophia began spending time together. Not dates exactly. Not at first. They visited the hospital ward together. They walked through Central Park while she told him about Caravaggio, and he told her about bridge construction. They ate lunch at a tiny Venezuelan restaurant she loved, where the owner knew her name and brought extra plantains without being asked. It was during one of these lunches that Daniel felt it. Not the desperate longing he had chased with Elena. Something deeper. Something that felt like coming home after a long journey to find the lights on and the door open. Sophia made him feel seen. Not as a billionaire, not as a name on a building, but as Daniel, the man who missed his father, the man who ate dinner alone, the man who wanted someone to argue about movies with on a rainy Sunday, and Sophia, who had grown up in the shadow of a powerful and often absent father, who had spent her life trying to build something meaningful outside the gilded cage of the Kessler name, found in Daniel something she had not expected. She found a man who listened. A man who remembered the small things, the name of the child she had read to that morning, the artist she had mentioned wanting to see. A man whose power did not diminish her, but somehow made space for her. Neither of them spoke about what was growing between them. It was too new, too fragile, like the first green shoot pushing through cold soil. But they both felt it, and they both protected it with the careful tenderness of people who have been hurt before and know the cost of hope. Then Victor Kessler found out. The call came on a Tuesday evening. Daniel was at home, reading on his couch, when his phone rang. The voice on the other end was smooth and cold. "Daniel," Victor said, "I understand you have been spending time with my daughter." The word daughter landed like a blade. Not because Daniel had forgotten who Sophia's father was. He had not forgotten for a single moment. But hearing Victor say it forced the collision of two worlds Daniel had been carefully keeping separate. "Sophia is a grown woman," Daniel said carefully. "Sophia is my daughter," Victor replied. "And you are the man who has spent 15 years trying to destroy everything I have built." "That is not true," Daniel said. Victor laughed. It was a sound without warmth. "Let me be clear," he said. "If you continue seeing my daughter, I will make the Chicago deal disappear. I will make every deal disappear. I will burn every bridge you have ever built, and I will make sure Sophia knows exactly what kind of man you are." The line went dead. Daniel sat in the silence of his apartment and felt the weight of the choice before him. The Chicago deal was worth $300 million. His reputation, built over 30 years, was worth infinitely more. Victor Kessler had the connections and the ruthlessness to make good on his threats. But then Daniel thought of Sophia, her laugh, her kindness, the way she held the hand of a frightened child and whispered, "You are brave." He thought of the hollow space in his chest that had been there for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to be whole, and he realized that Sophia had been filling that space so quietly, so gently, that he had not noticed until now. He thought of Elena's words, "I am not a deal to be closed," and he understood at last what she had been trying to teach him. Love was not an acquisition. It was not a strategy. It was a surrender. A willing, terrifying, Beautiful surrender to the possibility that another person could matter more than everything you had built. Daniel picked up his phone and called Sophia. "Your father knows about us," he said. There was a pause. Then Sophia's voice steady and clear. "I know, he called me too." "What did he say?" "He said I had to choose. Him or you." Daniel closed his eyes. "And what are you going to choose?" Another pause. Longer this time. He could hear her breathing. He could hear the faint sound of a one-eyed cat purring in the background. "I am choosing the man who held my hand at the hospital last week when that little girl sang her favorite song," Sophia said. "I am choosing the man who cried and did not try to hide it. I am choosing you, Daniel." The words hit him like sunlight after a long winter. His eyes burned. His throat tightened. He pressed his hand against his chest and felt his heart beating, strong and sure and full. Victor made good on his threats. The Chicago deal collapsed. Regulatory complications appeared from nowhere. Reporters called with pointed questions about past transactions. It was a coordinated assault, precise and merciless, exactly the kind of campaign Victor Kessler excelled at. But Daniel did not crumble. He let the deal go. He faced the regulators with transparency. He answered the reporters with honesty. And through it all, Sophia stood beside him, not as a trophy or a symbol, but as a partner. She brought him coffee at midnight when he was buried in legal documents. She made him laugh when the pressure felt unbearable. She reminded him, again and again, that he was more than his empire. The battle with Victor lasted 4 months. It was exhausting and expensive, and at times frightening. But something unexpected happened during those months. People who had watched Daniel for years, business associates, old friends, even some of Victor's own allies, began to see something they had not seen before. They saw a man who chose love over profit. A man who walked away from hundreds of millions of dollars because his heart mattered more than his portfolio. And that choice, that single vulnerable human choice, earned him something no amount of money could buy. It earned him genuine respect. Victor Kessler eventually backed down, not because he lost the fight, but because Sophia called him one Sunday morning and asked him to come to her apartment. She sat him down at her small kitchen table and made him tea and told him something she had never told him before. "I love you, Dad," she said, "but I have spent my whole life trying to earn your attention by being quiet and small and obedient, and I am done being small. Daniel sees me. He sees the real me. And if you cannot accept that, then you are going to lose me. Not because I am choosing him over you, but because I am finally choosing myself." Victor Kessler, a man who had faced down regulators and rivals and market crashes without flinching, sat at his daughter's kitchen table and wept, because in her words he heard the echo of his own failures. The missed recitals, the forgotten birthdays, the decades of putting power ahead of presence. He did not apologize that day. Victor was not a man who apologized easily. But he stopped his campaign against Daniel. He returned the Chicago deal to the negotiating table, and the following Christmas, when Sophia invited him to dinner at Daniel's penthouse, he came. He brought wine. He shook Daniel's hand at the door. He sat at the table and ate roasted chicken and listened while Sophia told stories about the children at the hospital. And when Daniel stood to clear the dishes, Victor said quietly, so only Daniel could hear, "Take care of her." Daniel looked at him. "I will," he said. On a warm evening the following spring, Daniel and Sophia sat on a bench in Central Park. The trees were blooming. The air smelled of fresh grass and possibility. Picasso, the one-eyed cat, was at home, probably destroying something valuable with his terrible manners. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box, not wrapped in gold or adorned with ribbons. Just a simple velvet box, the kind that holds the heaviest questions. Sophia looked at the box. She looked at Daniel. Her violet eyes filled with tears. "I spent a long time chasing something I thought I wanted," Daniel said. "And then I stopped chasing. And you walked into me and spilled wine on my shirt. And everything I had been looking for was standing right there, holding an empty glass and apologizing." Sophia laughed through her tears. That laugh, that beautiful, genuine, unguarded laugh. She opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple and elegant. A single stone that caught the evening light and held it. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger. His hands were trembling. Hers were too. They sat there on that bench, while the park turned gold around them, two people who had found each other through rejection and rivalry and pain, and who had chosen each other not because it was easy but because it was true. Daniel Ashford had spent his life building an empire. He had accumulated wealth and power, and influence beyond anything his father could have imagined. But sitting on that bench with Sophia's hand in his, watching the last light of day paint the sky in shades of amber and rose, he understood something his father had always known. The greatest thing a man can build is not a tower or a fortune. It is a life shared with someone who sees his heart and chooses to stay. And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe that fate knows what it is doing, even when we do not.